I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ghana people who are the traditional custodians of this land that we're on at the moment. And I'm going to build on this because there's an awful lot we can learn from our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. And the main thing is their relationship with the land and how they managed it so successfully for so many tens of thousands of years. So this is going to be an integral part of what I'm talking about. I'm taking two themes in meditation. One is the one you're all familiar with, which is how it gets you calm, and we're going to talk about that. But the other one is its use to see clearly. This isn't quite so well known, but this is what the purpose of mindfulness is. And that's why I'm now talking about our Aboriginal friends, because they saw this country completely differently from the way we do. One of the things is, it's interesting that we say, I live in Australia, but I live on the earth. We don't say I live in the earth. And when you think about it, that's really weird. That I live in this country, but I don't live in the earth, and this country is a part of the earth. I live on the earth. And this has been a foundation story in our culture, whereas Aborigines see it totally differently, as does the meditation tradition. That's why I'm bringing them together. They see themselves as an integral part of the life of this earth, and as I said, so does the meditation tradition. Aborigines see the earth as their mother, which in reality it is, when you think about it. Our bodies come from the earth, they're nourished by the earth all through our lives, and then they return to the earth at death. So you can, in meditation, directly experience what they're talking about. And in level 1, first lesson, moving from our thoughts to our senses is the function of meditation. That's how we relax the body and calm the mind. And we live so much in our thoughts. The major problem we have is losing touch with our bodies. Well, Aborigines were the opposite. They lived in their bodies and were very much in touch with their senses. I had an extraordinary experience up at the Ghana Festival once because they did men's business with the men. So we all went out on the lovely beaches looking at things, and the women complained because they had to do basket weaving. And they wanted to go out too, so they eventually had to change it all. But I never forget this experience. We were on this vast wild beach, totally clear sand, and our Aboriginal guide suddenly said to this boy, he's about 12 years old in our group, dig there. He just pointed to a spot. And there was no mark or anything on the sand, so he started digging, got bored after a while and stopped. And the guy turned around and said, no, keep digging. And he dug the same distance again and dug up the whole turtle's nest of all these eggs. And I was just gobsmacked. I thought, how did he know that? Well, that's how finely attuned their senses are. We just couldn't see them. So that's what I mean about living in the earth. The senses are right there with the earth. And that's one of the functions of meditation, to bring us into this rich world. So I think it's extremely important for us to start to learn this, that we're not above or separate from this planet. One of the most staggering things that happened when we first went out into space was the photographs coming back of our Earth. This tiny little blue planet floating in space. And we realised just how unique it is, which it is. And that started to totally transform our view in the Earth of how vulnerable it is, and how precious it is, and how small it is in the vastness of the universe. And just in our solar system, there's nothing like it. So it's incredibly beautiful. And we start to have the feeling, well, this is our home, you know? And that's what it is. It's our home. And we've discovered how unique it is, as I said. And one of the things that is right there in the whole meditation tradition is the understanding of how totally dependent we are on it. And as a culture, we tend to take that completely for granted. So as I said, 2 points I'm making. One is meditation is all about keeping your cool so that you can keep your cool in the heat of the moment when things are really happening. But the other one is, as I said, to see clearly, to start to open up our view of things. And this is the second point I'm making about how we actually see our earth and our place in it. So anything can hit us at any time, a crisis, like the bushfires. Anything can come out of the blue at any time, like an accident. There's nothing we can do about it. It happens to us all. But the one thing in those situations that is in our hands is what meditation is teaching and giving the tools for, is our emotions. We don't have to be swept away by them, we can actually hold them and have some control over them. And of course the worst thing anyone can do in a crisis is panic. That just makes it 1,000 times worse. And so in level 1 we talk about this, we devote a whole class to it, of a technique where you can check and just calm your emotions before you act. Because if we're out of balance and, you know, panicking, and we do something, we're just going to make it 1,000 times worse. And better to just disappear. So that's why they say, if it's a catastrophic day, just go away. Don't upset things. They need people who are going to be right there on the ground, not panicking. Of course, that takes some training. But as I said, that's one of the major functions of meditating. So that's why I've called this talk, Keeping Your Cool in the Heat of the Moment. It's such an important thing to learn. And so many people in the centre have learned it and realise how life-changing it is not to be swept around by what's happening around us, but to be able to, you know, hold still and then deal with it when we're in a good state. So it's all about learning our mental and emotional balance and how to hold ourselves steady no matter what's going on. And the great thing is, you don't have to be an expert straight away, because you can't be. You can practice it day by day, just practicing, and that's why we teach these little meditations that people can pick up easily. And they are working when you don't notice them anymore. I never forget a client years ago. We had 3 sessions. She was referred by a psychologist. And the second session she came back and said, well, look, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to do my meditation. I looked at her and thought, you look different, you know, you look far more settled. And then halfway through the session she said, oh, you know that silly little thing you showed me? I do that all the time. That's the way it should be. She stopped even noticing she was doing it, because it's just this little thing that's building the check on getting swept away by emotions. So that's how it starts. So as I said, we learn, we can get a handle on our emotions, we can control them, even though we can't always control what's happening around us. Now, as I said, the other really important skill of meditation and mindfulness is when your mind is calm, and interestingly enough, only when your mind is calm, you can see clearly. If your mind isn't calm, we just can't see clearly. And that's why we start panicking, we just don't know what to do. Whereas once your mind is calm, you can start to see what's happening and then work out what to do and respond to that. And that is such an important skill, because not seeing what's happening is what causes all our pain and suffering. It just hits us and we think, well, where did that come from? Well, it's because we didn't see it. It's not that, you know, we weren't warned of it, you know. We just didn't see it. Now, to see the people in our lives and who they are, this is the big thing, instead of who we think they are or want them to be, and that's why we don't see things, or hope they might be one day, you know. As an old psychologist friend, this is very sexist, I'm sorry, but as an old psychologist friend, and she was a woman, said, all women want their husband to change, and all men want their wives to stay exactly the same. Now that's a recipe for disaster, of course, because it's not going to happen. And it can sometimes take, you know, a very long time to discover that. So to be able to see the people in our lives and who they really are, is such an important skill, and meditation really helps develop that skill. Now, this also applies to our communities and our environment and the world we live in, and that's why I've been talking about the original Australians, because they do see the world totally differently. So let's look at it. First thing, they don't see themselves as owners of the land. Totally foreign concept. They see themselves as custodians to hand on to the next generation. A much, much longer view. Whereas we've brought in the idea of ownership. And the fact is, when you really look at it, we can't own the earth. We're not around long enough. It outlasts us by billions of years. But we can look after it, you know, while we're here. Now that would be a huge change in our own culture if we just started to adopt that. But that's why they treat the earth and everything in it totally differently from the way they do. They see themselves as custodians, as caretakers. And that is actually a much more true view than ours. Now, I think that this is a big change that's starting to happen in our culture. You get these big changes in history. The last great big one was at the end of the Middle Ages in the 15th century with the Renaissance. And I believe, and I think from experience and history and looking at what's happening, that what is happening now is a change as big as that one was. Because the whole view has to change. So it's very interesting to go back to the original story of our culture and look closely at the meaning of the phrase which has been used for so long to justify what we believe was our right to dominate and to use solely for our purpose and to control the planet and the life on it. So if you want to know this story of a culture, you look at the religion. So we go back to Christianity, which is the founding story of our culture, and we find this passage in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And God said, so sorry about this, here's the chapter and verse from the Bible. I don't usually do this. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So that's the St. James version. Now, have dominion over has come to mean domination. And so supports conquering and enslaving nature, which is the story and what we've been doing. Whereas I thought, well, let's go and look at the Hebrew scholars and see what they come up with. And I found something extremely interesting, because this is unlike anything the biblical writers could have imagined. The original Hebrew actually means to exercise skilled mastery among or with respect to. The word above isn't there at all. I'll just say it again, exercise skilled mastery among. There's the key word. Or, another translation is with respect to. Well, let's see what that takes us, because it doesn't say over at all. And that means, when you start to unpack it, to help everything prosper and be fruitful. And when you go into the following verses, you see that's what it's saying. Now that's exactly how our Indigenous Australians see their role. And that's exactly how the meditation tradition has always seen it too. Because when you really start to open up to meditation experience, you start to discover how interdependent everything is. Nothing can exist without everything else. And this means that we, as human beings, are just as dependent on the welfare of the other living creatures on this planet and the earth itself as they are on us. And we could call this interbeing. And it's a fundamental concept that runs right through the meditation tradition. So this means seeing our role as human beings to live in this earth, and because of our incredible intelligence that we've developed, to nurture and sustain the life that we're embedded in. Now this is what my teacher called enlightened self-interest. To exercise our skilled mastery to nourish and enhance the life of this planet, which is our home. Why? Because it nourishes and enhances us. It's a two-way thing. One can't happen without the other. And this means looking at and starting to understand, well, what we do in the end affects us. The health of the life around us and of the earth itself affects our health directly. And that's why I've talked of how Aborigines see the earth and the world. That's exactly how they see it. It's actually a far more true and accurate view and way of seeing than how our culture sees the earth and the way around us. And as I said, the meditation tradition sees it the same way. Well, let's look at what this means and where this all came from. So in the short term, yes, you can dominate, you can control to a certain extent. And it works. But we're not seeing the long-term consequences of that. And what that is, and this is the key, is that we're actually seeing ourselves as separate from everything around us. You can't dominate something if you see yourself a part of it. You have to see yourself above it and separate. So that means we then separate us from everything, set ourselves from everything, and that's why everyone's so unhappy. And that's why anxiety and depression and all these things are rising, because everyone feels so isolated. Well, it's all coming from this view. Yep, works in the short term results, long term doesn't work. So we live in the world and in the earth. We're totally dependent on the world and the earth for our survival. And as I said, we can't survive without it. Well, if we don't see how everything works together, we especially don't see how we affect it. And as I said, we don't see how this affects us. And when we don't see, sooner or later we hit a crisis. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. This is the other function of meditation. Is if we don't see what's going on, we're going to bang into it sooner or later. Now this one's taken 500 years. Because the law of life, this is what we're not seeing, is that everything changes. And what works for a while isn't going to work forever. And we have this extraordinary habit as human beings of ignoring when things change because we don't like it. And we've done that ever since we've been around until the change hits us, whether we like it or not. So I think that this is one of the big changes which is now happening, is we're having to face, well, it's not working as well as it should, you know? And it's in the way we actually see the whole world around us and our relationship with it. has been successful for centuries, but it just can't work any longer. Now, the interesting thing is that this idea of dominion over and control and domination only came in at the Renaissance. As I said to the original writers, they would have been gobsmacked. This is what happened. And the reason was it came in with the development of science and technology. When we could start to control things, you can imagine what that was like. You know, it's just staggering to think that you can start to have power and do things. And it's been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. But everything has a beginning and has an end. It changes. And that's got us to where we are now. And it's worked for 500 years. Now it's obvious something isn't working. So this is where I'm pointing and putting my finger, is this view, which the meditation tradition has understood, you know, ever since it's been around, and which our Aboriginal friends live in. As I said, they managed this country for tens of thousands of years. So I think we've got a lot to learn from. So this is the change that's happening now. What's worked so well for centuries really needs to change, because it ignores the fundamental fact that we're not separate from the world around us. We can't be. It's just not happening. We're among and part of the life of this planet. We're totally dependent on it, as it is dependent on us. We're affecting it, that's affecting us. So it's starting to see how we're affecting it. As the law of physics says, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And sometimes, over the big scale, that can take 500 years to play its way through. So I'd suggest something, you know, it's old-fashioned now, but anyone who was in Scouts knows the motto. It's a good thing to be prepared for change, is to be prepared. And the main way to be prepared is to open up to see, well, what's actually happening? It's just to ask that question. And the best way to be prepared is to be able to see and understand what's happening. Because, as I said, the key to life, the only constant in life, interestingly enough, is it's always changing. And that's the one thing we don't like. But there ain't nothing we can do about it. It's just what life is, actually change. When something's alive, it's constantly changing. Now we can hold that for a while, but you know, sooner or later, it's going to swing. Now that's my talk. Thank you very much for listening.